So today on this session, we're going to meet Sarah Savory, and Sarah Savory is who's the daughter of Alan Savory of the Alan Savory Institute. Is doing some great work in Zimbabwe around teaching children how to think in a way that doesn't, in like a non-reductionist way, a kind of more holistic way, holistic decision making. And one of the interesting things about this is that she's pioneering this way of thinking, which brings into social, economic, and environmental as one whole being, as opposed to the reductionist way of splitting them up. And what she's found is really interesting about how, by teaching the children, she then enables the adults to understand it more. It seems that children are more receptive to this way of learning, and so she's developing this, and she's doing it in agricultural areas of Zimbabwe. Really interesting to listen to her ideas about decision making and the work that she's doing.
Sure. So my name is Sarah Savory, and I live in Zimbabwe in Africa. And my father's quite a famous ecologist who dedicated his entire life to finding out what it is about our management, human management, that causes healthy land to desertify, land degradation, etc., environmental degradation. And that was back in the 60s. And on his journey, he's discovered some new management insights that go against human belief. So it's been very difficult to get these insights into mainstream thinking and knowledge, etc., because whenever there's truly new insights that go against our beliefs, which have assumed scientific validity just because we believed them for so long, it's almost impossible to get adults to change how they think. And there's only two things that block learning. It's our egos and what we already think we know, what we already believe. So what I've done is taken these new insights that my dad developed with thousands of scientists over the years, etc., and I've started teaching it to children. And I found that, I started off teaching senior school children, and then I went on to junior school children, and I found the junior school children picked it up very, very quickly. And now what I've done is simplified the material to a point where I can teach adults without getting too much backlash.
Without scaring them.
I found it in a way where I don't offend people, because I put it very logically and in point form type thing, so that it's logical rather than going against anything that because as soon as something triggers something that goes against what they believe, or their ego, their professional ego, it's like, what? No. So by teaching children, I've finally got to a point where I can get through to adults without getting that block. And so what I'm now doing is developing a workbook for schools it's called holistic decision making, because our decisions involve complexity of people, finances, and environment, no matter where we are in the world. So it's managing that complexity simultaneously, and then ecological literacy. So there's management insights and then land management insights. So there's two components to what I'm teaching. It's holistic decision making and then ecological literacy, because all human endeavor relies entirely on nature. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. So now I'm training teachers and doing a workbook for schools.
Very good. Well, so what was your father's key understanding? Because when we spoke last time, you gave me some great examples of things where kind of like the linear decision making. We've decided they're the problem, it's the problem, let's get rid of those. And then, because that happens a lot, doesn't it, in farming, I think, as well.
In every human decision on the planet, it's happening, because what he actually discovered was that every single human on the planet makes every single decision using an identical process. So we have a genetically embedded decision-making process, which is inherent in all tool-using animals. So it's not just humans. And of course, when we were first about, our tools were simple stick and stones, like any other tool-using animal. So he discovered a genetically inherited decision-making process. So no matter what you look at on the globe, no matter what management framework you look at, way of making decisions, when you break it down to that core where the decision is made, because all management is making a decision, where that decision is made, you'll find that every single time there's an identical process that's been followed, no matter whether it's the president of the United States putting a man on the moon, or an otter breaking open a clamshell,
yeah,
or a human making a decision for a basic family need, or whatever. The process used is identical, and that's where we need to adjust, because what happens with humans is our technology advanced in crazy speed over the last 100 or so years. So unlike the other tool using animals, because the other tool using animals are still only having to make social decisions for themselves, and they exist in harmony with their habitat or their environment. Whereas what happened with humans is we did only have social decisions to make within our family groups or whatever. And then when our technology advanced, it enabled us to start to manipulate nature over time and make more and more sophisticated tools and technology, which enabled us to start to harm and manipulate our environment. And what we ended up doing was we stopped only having social decisions, and then we started adding environmental decisions, because we were trying to control nature and manipulate nature. So we were managing our environment. And then during that time period, we also added a financial component to it. So we'd added this complexity of finance, environment, and social. But what we did is carry on using our same decision-making process that we're all born with. And that's where we're going wrong, because it's like we have a glitch in our software, in our brains, that needs a slight adjustment at the point of our decisions themselves, whether it's a policy or an individual decision, to include the complexity that we weren't genetically born to manage, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Are we sure it's an inherited problem or a systematic problem, in the fact that when we're born in, if we take school children, say over here, one of the things that is spoken a lot about is the fact that when kids go into school, they're very, very creative. There is some research around this, but by the time they've gone through the schooling system, they're a lot less creative. It's almost like their brains have been shaped to this kind of industrial model of the world. Do you think there's a bit of that?
No, because no matter what you look at, the way we make decisions is the same. No matter what we try and do, we're missing it at the point of the decision, because it's automatic. So the process is that we only ever make decisions for one or two of three reasons. We will either be meeting a need, fulfilling a desire, or trying to solve a problem. So we only have three reasons for making decisions, and we only make decisions in a social, economic, or environmental context. There are no other. So that's the process. So we'll have an objective, and with us, it started off as only having to be a social objective.
Yeah.
And we will have either a social need, desire, or problem that we want to address. And then we use a tool, technology. And before, when our decisions were only social, it was only stick and stone tools. And then we will base that decision on past experience, what we've been taught, or whatever expert advice these days, that sort of thing. Yeah. So we all have that same process, and you can test that with a tool using animal as well. So what happened with humans is we've kept that same process, but then what we started doing is not just meeting a social need. We would then say, oh, we've got a social need, desire, or problem. Now we've got an environmental need, desire, or problem, or an economic need, desire, or problem. So we've taken that same process and we broke it down reduce the decision into manageable parts, because we have a mechanistic worldview. We believe in technology. We can break something down and make it easier to manage. But that complexity is so inseparable. Human societies are so inseparable from nature, and our economies, everything relies on nature, that it became damaging and reductionist, because once we make a decision there, we're going to knock on to effect there. If we make a decision there, we're going to knock on. So it became damaging unwittingly. And once people understand this new framework, or this just slight adjustment at the point of decision, you can see exactly why every policy in the world is being disastrous. So, and then what we did is we separated social, environmental, and economic, to the point, if you look around the world today, we have social experts, we have environmental experts, we have economic experts, and you can break each of those into thousands of different areas. So we're isolating everything more and more, because an economy cannot exist without environmental health. Our social health can't exist without environmental health, etc. So our physical and financial well-being of us as individuals and collectively rely on the environment. I always explain it to my kids. I said, it's like if you had a bottle of water and we're trying to manage a bottle of water, and we know it's made up of hydrogen and oxygen, but we separate those into manageable parts, and we call in an expert on oxygen and an expert on hydrogen. And we say, right, we need your advice on that, and we need your advice on that. And we manage them separately and wonder why the water's failing, wonder why the whole thing is collapsing. And all this framework does, what my dad developed was a new way of looking at the decision at the point of the decision, where you're never losing sight. You zoom right out at the point of decision itself and test simultaneously for the short and long-term social, economic, and ecological aspects of that decision, which every financial transaction entails and every single policy entails. So basically what this framework does is make it impossible to make a bad decision, to make an unsound decision. And what our genetic process does is make it impossible to make a sound decision, because we're separating the inseparable.
And do you think also the fact that we can't possibly know everything, can we? I mean, when I do this with teams and help teams make decisions, it's more, okay, I call it discovery as opposed to decision making, and it's made up of sense making, make sense of the situation from a, what do I think? What does the situation think? What does the team or ecology think? And then so make sense of it, then make a decision, but then have an ecology check. I call it the crap filter, for a better word. What are the consequences we haven't thought of, the real costs down the line, the assumptions that we've made, and what do people on the planet think about it? And then and know that we can't absolutely know everything, so we go through the process again. We immediately have to evaluate the outcome of what we've done, because there'll be unseen consequences. Do you think, does your decision-making process do that? Does it entail the fact that actually we can't be completely certain about any outcome, can we?
No, of course not. And we're managing within this complexity. So what it guarantees is we never look at those three aspects in isolation ever again. We look at them as one whole thing. So now what system science does is look, because we know we're managing those three things and it's affecting those three things. But I'm sure you've seen that Venn diagram of the three separate circles: people, planet, profit, or whatever it's called, people, planet, profit. And they have it like they sort of vaguely intercept somewhere in the middle. They don't. They're not three separate things that sometimes overlap. They are one whole thing that never is separable. So even when we do that, we look at it from the isolated perspective. We look at the whole picture, and then we break the decision down into those isolated perspectives, because we'll get an expert on the economic side, we'll get an expert on the environmental side, and we'll get an expert on the social side. And that's where the point of this decision, we've looked at the whole picture, we reduce it to those separate manageable parts from separate expert perspectives. So what the holistic management framework does is, you still need those experts and that advice, but you never look at the decision again from those isolated perspectives. You make the decision from the perspective of the whole. So what holistic management framework does is make you zoom out at that point of that decision thank you for advice, thank you for advice, thank you for, nobody's ever wrong. We run it through, and it's a framework. So you're guided by a holistic context, which is tying physical and financial stability to environmental health. And then there's the filtering checks that people can go through to test whether one decision is going to come out better in that situation, in that complexity at that time, because you can never predict it. So it enables any decision maker to make the right decision for them, because nobody's dealing with the same complexity twice. Yeah. And then with what you're talking about is we have for the more complex decisions or a policy or whatever, because right now what we do is we make a decision, develop a policy, and that's it. And we meet short-term objectives no matter long-term cost. Yeah. So what this does is then we immediately presume we're wrong.
Yes.
So it's presume wrong with every decision. And then you monitor it for the first sign of it being a wrong decision. So again, in this framework, when we're making more complex decisions or policies, we have we have a social weak link check, an ecological weak link check, and a economic weak link checks, depending on what you're doing. So you can see, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So if you can see where the breaking point or where the first sign of it being a wrong decision will come up, that's where you monitor, and then you replan. So you can redo that decision very quickly if it's wrong, because we just presume we're wrong, because we are managing within this. Will never fathom the complexity that we're managing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I always say to people, we're not managing it. We can never control the complexity of people, societies, and people, economies, and nature. But we must acknowledge that the universe is made up of wholes and patterns that are constantly changing, and we make decisions within that.
Yeah.
So I always call it as managing within, rather than, we can never control an economy or nature or anything like that. We can never predict or control. We can only respect that that's what we manage within, and manage according to the laws of the universe, which is exactly that those things aren't. So I teach kids to never look at anything as separate. Again, don't isolate that decision. You're still going to have social needs, desires, and problems. You're still going to have economic ones. You're still going to have environmental ones. But don't consider them at the point of the decision as separate. You've got to tie them all together at that point.
So why can't we get the big kids to think like this?
Well, we are. The good news is that through the kids, I'm having huge breakthroughs with the adults, because when the kids go home and talk to their parents, again, there's not that blockage, because their egos aren't engaged. I call it the ego being engaged. And so in rural communities, it's funny, we've been trying to break through for a long time, and I've been going in and working with schools. And the other day I had one of the chiefs of Wangi communal lands phone me and say, "Sarah, what are you doing in these schools?" He said, "I'm seeing such a difference in the adults." He said, "How can I support what you're doing?"
Wow.
And I said, "Just let me carry on with the schools. Thank you, Chief Shannon. That's very kind of you." And I've got 2 chiefs that I'm working with, because I'm just starting small and then growing as soon as I've got the content ready, that I've ironed out pieces. So we're seeing a huge change. And I was teaching a class here in Harare just as my guinea pigs of 10-year-olds. And it ended up, we had to move it, the class, because I had so many parents showing an interest, saying, "We want to join these lessons," because our kids are coming home and teaching us. Brilliant. And it wasn't even parents of some of the children, they were just randoms that came in. Yeah. So it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting. And I've hoped I've put it out very logically. So I'm going to do a couple of interviews where I do the presentation that I sent you this morning, but that's just the first half. Then we've also go on to ecological literacy, because people have to understand why and how the environment is going to be regenerated, because we can't do it without also doing that simultaneously. Because
so the regeneration bit is, so we stop making the same mistakes, and then here's how we kind of regenerate, recover from what we have been doing.
Because we've also got new discoveries on the ecological side. So when I'm teaching general public, people who live in cities, etc., they need to be ecologically literate. They need, we have totally ecologically illiterate politicians, expert advisors, giving advice on policy, etc., when everything depends on environmental health.
where are we?
No, so we were talking about the ecological literacy. So
Yeah,
it's so important, because whether you live in an apartment in New York or Singapore or Australia or anywhere you are, your decisions are still involving that complexity. So you have to have some degree of ecological literacy to understand why your decisions and what your decisions are affecting. And then at policy level, we've got completely ecologically illiterate people giving advice and etc. on policies, when
yeah,
the whole policy, no policy can be sound unless it's simultaneously socially, economically, and ecologically sound. Because if you just ask any human on the planet, can you survive or exist without healthy food, water, and air? The answer is no. It's everything we use or consume on the planet comes from nature. And I think an interesting point that I start off with when I'm doing the training is, if you look around the world today, and look, you just have to look over the last 120 years or so, you'll see that humans have been having huge successes, like monumental successes, in things like cell phones, computers, airplanes, bridges, buildings, toothbrushes. Everything is advancing in terms of those things, what we can produce, weapons, etc. And if you look at all of those things, they are all what we either manufacture or produce, from food and clothing to spacecraft.
mm-hmm.
So those things we're having huge successes with. And those are our technology. That's our technology. It's what we make or produce. And then if you look within that same time frame at where we're failing, you will see massively increasing and rapidly increasing now droughts, floods, wildfires, poverty, poaching, social breakdown, pandemics, mass immigration to cities, violence, social breakdown, economic instability, and climate change. It's all mounting in this climate change that everyone's talking about. So, and if you break all those things that I just mentioned down into categories, you'll find only three. They're social, economic, or environmental. And we now know that those are the only three things on the planet we manage. We manage ourselves, our economies, and our environment. And I always say we manage within them. So if we are collapsing with those three things and having successes with everything else, these are the only three things we manage. Everything else is our tools and technology, is what we use to help us while we manage these things. It can only be our management that's failing us.
Yes.
And we know why. We know how to adjust that glitch. And when I'm teaching, I also point out our total reliance on technology. But when we're dealing with land degradation, we're dealing with a biological problem. We are never going to solve our biological problems using technology. It's just not going to happen. We are going to solve our fossil fuel, all of those sort of things. Those use technologies. The good news on that side of things is, when it comes to everything we make or produce, it's not complex. The things we make or produce do what we make or produce them to do. They can't work if we stop using them. We can change how we make them if they're not working for us. We can change how we're producing things. So when those problems are coming up, they're going to be relatively easy to solve. On the biological side, which is management of human societies and nature, that's involving the complexity, and this is where we're not seeing the glitch. So I always say to people, okay, if I say to you today that your cell phone is not going to work, there's a glitch in your cell phone, it needs a software update, you have to change it. I said, would you do it? Yeah, we do it immediately. And you take a couple of weeks to adjust to the new software. Yeah, no problem. So I said, we've got a glitch in our inherited decision-making process that needs an update to include this new complexity that our technology enabled us to manage. And it's the holistic decision-making framework is incredibly simple, but it involves a change at the point of the decision. You no longer just make the decision, you look at it in its entirety of that social, economic, and environmental, short and long-term consequences you don't isolate them ever again. You always look at them simultaneously. So that's all that it does, is change the perspective at the point of the decision itself.
Yeah.
And like anything else, it takes a little bit of practice. And what kids do is it all makes sense, and they go, how do we do it? Okay, we do this, we develop our holistic context, and now we check our decisions. That's like a magnetic north. We use that. This is easy. And so they immediately get on and do it.
Yeah.
Adults don't do it. They want a practical, no, but I need to do something else. I'm like, that's all you do. Just do that. And now what I'm finding is I've got adults starting to do it, to actually understand it. And I've got these guys now messaging me saying, no wonder this policy is failing, because they're seeing things from a different perspective, which we don't inherently do. And it just takes a little bit of practice. And we're so obsessed with technology that we'll make any adjustment there. Yeah. But when it comes to like us, we struggle to make, because we can't believe that we could be making any mistakes, and we just didn't know. So it's nobody's fault, nobody's to blame. But luckily for us, we can make that adjustment, and it is relatively simple. So thank goodness for children. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, you know, we'd think that sensible people would take this on. It's kind of like a no-brainer, isn't it? In terms of, you know, when you describe it logically, coherently. But the challenge is that, you know, there will be people who will think, yeah, well, that's okay, but I'm quite happy where I am. I always say that, you know, we're driven by motivation, aspiration, and inspiration. Inspiration for making the world a better place, aspiration because I want to be a better person. We can aspire to that, but I'm motivated by human drivers. And one of the things that I think that stops this is kind of like the dominance behavior system that we've got, which is kind of our primate hierarchical system, if you like. You know, once someone gets their inner monkey gets hold of the bananas, they don't like letting go. And if I've got all the bananas, well, yeah, you could do the ecological decision making as long as I can keep hold of the bananas. And unfortunately, they're creating the outsized problems, aren't they?
It's, do you know what it is? It is, and but what we're also seeing, and again, you know, when people are in cities, well, everyone's been affected by this pandemic, and it's another result of ecological collapse and less healthy society. But people in cities are not directly affected by a lot of these things yet. Starting to with water and it's getting more and more because it's all increasing, fires, etc. But when I'm now in the communal areas, definitely in Zimbabwe, which again, when we go into the ecological literacy, is these brittle environments that have desertified on 2/3 of the planet's landmass, is they are facing such hardships, and they have seen, and it's in their generation. So we're having now a big kind of shift, because they are really.
So they've got the motivation, haven't they? That's it. They're already affected by the motivation. Yeah, pain and pleasure.
So we are moving it. The other thing then we're dealing with, while we can change people on an individual level and we can muddle along with our decision making as individuals, unless we're actual land managers, we have to take a little bit more into account. But as individuals, we can start to make better decisions. But where we manage land at scale, or ourselves at scale, is government. So we have to have a breakthrough in policy. And throughout history, when there are new insights that go against our beliefs, which our institutions lead with our beliefs and manage with our beliefs, it's taken about 200 years for an institution to accept the change. And we're only 50 years, about nearly 50 years into these new insights. And like my father always says, he says, we don't have the luxury of time on this one. We don't have 150 years to wait, because it's starting, the public's starting to shift. But we urgently need to break through in an institution, and we're trying. So my dad's put together a policy task force with a couple of us, where we're trying to break through in a small country. So we're trying in Zimbabwe, because we're never going to get through the red tape of a first world country. It's just too much too much. So we are trying to break through. But the first country to break through in developing, and we're focusing on an agricultural policy first, because that's the most damaging, destructive industry on the planet by miles, more than mining or any other extractive industry, is agriculture. Is destroying our soils much, much faster, because agriculture is based on chemistry and the corporate marketing of oil and technology. Yeah. That's our food, that's our soil. So we're exporting topsoil at an alarming rate. We're killing our soils with more and more pesticides and reductionist decisions that are just snowballing. And if we change one agricultural policy where we are tying the country's physical and financial stability to environmental health and regenerative, that's how we get regenerative agriculture, we will be whoever breaks through first in one policy within about a year and a half would be the first country to be producing more food than dead eroding soil ever. It will be the first country in history to truly have a regenerative agricultural policy. And then once we break through in those important policies, agricultural policies, it will see a snowball effect across the others, because
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's people. I find that people understand this, that the challenge is that a lot of people haven't got a pathway. We need the pioneers, someone's got to explore and pioneer this, so that it then allows other people an option. Oh yeah, I can carry on doing this, or actually there's a better one that goes along with my aspiration and my inspiration and motivation. So what's next with the school program thing? How are you going to, for want of a better word, mass market this? How are you going to get it out there, and how can people get in touch with you?
So it's really, really exciting. So I've got all the content now, and I'm happy with the layout. I've been doing some teacher training, because that's the problem, is I was managing to get through to kids but struggling to train teachers to teach kids. Now I've broken through that, and we're all on track. So I'm doing this workbook. It'll be ready soon, because I'm happy with the layout and the content and everything now. I've been just looking for teachers now, because I'm not a teacher, and I don't know how their curriculum is laid out, etc. So help on putting it into the correct lesson form to time with whatever's going on during the term, etc. The age groups we're looking at is grades, I'd say 5, 6, and 7.
With Zimbabwe. So we were talking about how we're going to expand this, how you're expanding this. You've got the workbook nearly sorted. Well, you're pretty happy with the layout. You're looking for teachers to help you put it into the schools, and
put it into the workbook form. So I'm going to do a really nice illustrated workbook for schools, and I've got so my father started SAVORY Institute, which is in the state, and SAVORY institutes have many hubs all over the world which support each other. So there's an incredible network of hubs, and so it would start going through those hubs. I've already had offers from various accredited SAVORY Institute professionals saying how could they help with translations, etc. All of those sort of things. Yeah. So I think basically it's just start it here, get it right, because it's a workbook. It will develop as we go, and it will get better each version. But I'm ready with the first one. I'm happy with the first one to start getting out. So the plan is just to start through those networks, getting it out there. And the more people I teach, the more teachers I've been using as my guinea pigs to start this off have been like, wow, this is so vital. So I've now got a really good network of rural. I focused on rural teachers and schools first of all. Now I'm going to do some urban ones as well, just because that's where they're actually managing the land. They're on the land. So we need to start getting things moving there more urgently than in urban areas. But we also need influence on policy. So through all this work of teaching children, I've actually now simplified it to a point where I would be much more eloquent in a policy meeting, and be able to get through to, because I've had 2 meetings with our president already, and now I'm like, okay, I'm ready for another one, because now I can get it through better. So so it's all, you know, anything is you can only learn by doing. And I've been taught so much by children, by teachers. Every time I go and do training, I'm learning more every time. It's and we use it to discuss a lot. And now I'm looking for facilitators, etc., in those communal areas, because I can't be in there all the time. It's 9 hours drive for me to go into these areas, so I'm looking for facilitators. So it's just gonna I hope grow like this.
Exactly,
and the workbook will be suitable, because every single human is making decisions using the same process everywhere in the world within their own unique complexity. And this management framework, holistic management, you cannot make the wrong decision for you. And what I love about it is it empowers the decision maker, whether it's in an individual situation or a community situation, to make decisions within their own values and beliefs and everything, while respecting the fact that our decisions affect everyone, because there's that social check, there's that financial check, etc. So it allows you to always flow with the unique complexity which is being decided, the decision is being made within. So I can't come along and say to you, well, this worked for me, you have to do it, because that's our nature, right? We copy and paste. We say, well, this policy works here, it'll work there. This farming practice works here, you have to do it there. No, what this decision-making framework does is ensure that the action is within the unique complexity it's being made within. So if you have a good farming practice, it could be the best farming practice in the world for me.
Yeah.
I can't tell you to copy and paste it. I can say, well, test this within your situation and see if it's going to work for you. If it's not within your holistic context, and filtering through those checks, adjust it or don't use it. But don't just copy and paste what I'm doing. So we've got, you know, at the moment, we've got some good practices all being shouted about in agriculture. Oh, you have to change practice, you have to change practice. No, it's the management that decides the practice that's causing the issue, not the practices themselves. So once we change the management, the practice becomes regenerative. If we don't change the management, that practice being copy and pasted becomes reductionist. Yeah. So my dad always says, changing practice without changing the management that decides the practice is like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're not addressing the root cause of the problem. Yes. Sorry. So yeah, it's very simplified now through children, and I hope it's just logical. You know what I mean? And that's the more logical I make it, the more which we're breaking through. Yeah.
Okay. How do people get in touch with you? If, say, you know, there's a teacher over this side or someone who fancies facilitating this, how do they get in touch? What's the best way?
I guess through either my LinkedIn. It's all Sarah Savory. I'm just independent consultant and educator. So Sarah Savory. Yeah, my Facebook, my Instagram, or my LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find me. They can get in touch with you and ask you.
Okay. Yeah. So sure. I'll put that on the links underneath this. Yeah.
And it's always nice to have, you know, now I'm at a stage, it's been quite a lonely journey because nobody else is doing this young education. In terms of just developing the content and stuff. And now it's exciting because I'm at the point where we're you know, it's more collaborative and fun and interesting. And
brilliant. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll make sure that I put plenty of links in for you, and I'll when the recording there.